I used to think loyalty was protection, that if you worked hard enough, delivered more than anyone asked, and stayed late when no one else would, the company would shield you when life finally demanded something back. That's what I told myself the night I hovered over the submit button on my medical leave request. My hands were trembling from another autoimmune flare, the kind of invisible pain people mistake for weakness. If you've ever been told to just push through it, keep listening because this is where pushing nearly broke me. It was 2:13 a.m. I remember because the glow of my laptop clock felt harsher than usual, cutting through the quiet of my apartment. I had spreadsheets open, code snippets running in half-broken tabs, and a bottle of ibuprofen half empty on the desk. I'd been the lead analyst on a rollout that would decide whether our team hit the quarterly bonus pool. I wasn't just another cog. I was the architect of the entire risk model the client was paying 7 figures to implement. And yet at that moment, I was afraid to ask for a pause. I drafted the request 3 times. The first version sounded too apologetic, like I was begging permission to be sick. The second sounded too defensive, citing policy sections like I was already in a fight. The third was simple. Per physician's instruction, I am requesting medical leave under ADA policy, effective immediately. Documentation attached. No emotion, just facts. I attached the scanned letter, hesitated, and hit submit. When the confirmation screen flashed, I expected relief. Instead, a slow panic spread through me, because I knew exactly who would read it first. HR, the same faceless portal that had denied other requests with boilerplate lines about business impact. I closed the laptop and lay down fully clothed, telling myself tomorrow would be different. That tomorrow they'd finally recognize how much I'd already given. Morning came with a ping, a single-line email, no greeting, no acknowledgement of the doctor's note. Your request is not approved at this time due to critical business needs. I stared at it until the words blurred. Not approved, as if my body were some optional project they could postpone. I pressed my palms into my eyes until stars bloomed. In the office Slack, my manager had already reassigned my client, stand up to someone else, with no mention of why. By noon, the whispers had started. She's out again, one message read. Another, guess we'll see if the kid can handle it. The kid was the VP's protege, 2 years out of grad school, the kind of person who smiled too wide in meetings and repeated my points louder as if they were his own. That afternoon, the VP called me into a quick sync. His voice was syrupy, too casual. Look, we know you've been struggling. Maybe this isn't the best time for you to take on so much. We'll have Alex handle point for now. Handle point. My project. My design. My months of unpaid overtime disguised as team spirit. I swallowed hard. This isn't about struggling. This is a documented medical condition. I followed protocol. He cut me off with a sigh, the kind that makes you feel small before you finish the sentence. Sometimes life throws curveballs, but clients don't care about curveballs. They want results. We need reliable people, strong people. The word hung in the air, strong. His eyes lingered on me just long enough to twist the knife. Weak was what he didn't say. I walked back to my desk in a haze. Around me, the office hummed with keystrokes and muffled laughter. Screens glowed with dashboards I had built. Every graph, every metric was mine. But suddenly, I was the outsider. I thought of my doctor's warning. Stress accelerates flares, and laughed under my breath at the irony. That night, I stayed later than anyone else. Not because I wanted to prove them wrong, but because I needed to remind myself I was still the backbone of this machine. The pain was a steady burn through my joints, but the code compiled clean. The logs ticked green. I kept whispering, "They can't take this from me." But the truth was already staring back from that morning email. They had decided, and I wasn't just fighting my illness anymore. I was fighting a system that had quietly labeled me replaceable. The smear didn't start with an email. It started with silence. Meetings I had once led suddenly went forward without my invite. My calendar thinned, not because my workload had eased, but because someone else was now presenting my slides. The first time it happened, I was watching a Teams recording at 2 a.m., lying flat on the floor with my laptop balanced on my stomach, joints stiff from another flare. I recognized every color code, every annotation, every conditional flag in the deck, and yet the voice explaining it wasn't mine. It was Alex's, the VP's golden boy. He smiled too wide, spoke too fast, and butchered the logic I had built. And the worst part? They clapped for him. A week earlier, my VP had cornered me in the hallway with his favorite kind of pep talk, the kind that sounded like concern until you replayed it later. You've got talent, no doubt, but clients need confidence. You come off fragile sometimes. We need someone who projects strength. Fragile. That was the word he chose, as if my body's war against itself made me less capable, less valuable. I stood there gripping my notebook so tightly the coil left marks in my palm. Soon after, HR slid a performance plan draft into my inbox. Draft, not final. As if it were a collaborative Google Doc where I'd help write my own demotion. It listed attendance inconsistencies and concerns about client-facing reliability. No mention of the logged overtime, the midnight deployments, or the doctor's notes I'd filed. It was a paper trail in the making, designed to corner me into either quitting or failing. Meanwhile, the office whispers grew louder. In Slack channels, I saw emojis I wasn't tagged in. When I spoke, people glanced at Alex before responding, as if he held veto power. At lunch, I overheard one colleague joke, "Guess we've got an upgrade." An upgrade. I tried to hold on to the little things. Running unit tests that passed clean. Watching a red error log flip to green. Reminding myself that facts were facts, no matter who tried to erase them. But even the facts were being rewritten. One morning, I logged into the repository to find my code commits reassigned, under Alex's name. Reorganized for clarity, the note read. Whole chunks of my framework had been stripped of guardrails I had fought to keep. Error messages were downgraded to warnings, thresholds relaxed for the sake of faster demos. It wasn't my work anymore. It was a distorted copy wearing my skeleton. I confronted him once, quietly, in the break room. "You reused my spec without attribution." He smirked, eyes flicking toward the glass office where the VP sat. "I streamlined it. Big difference." That smirk stayed with me. It wasn't arrogance. It was security. He knew he was protected. That night, I pulled up my private log. Dates, times, file hashes, Slack exports. I saved screenshots of the repo before and after the changes. I backed up my original framework to an encrypted drive, with timestamps intact. It was no longer about trust. It was about evidence. The next day, in an all-hands, the VP congratulated Alex for taking initiative and driving reliability improvements. My name wasn't mentioned once. Applause filled the room. I didn't clap. Inside, the decision crystallized. They wanted me to vanish quietly, replaced by a shinier, healthier version of myself. But I wasn't going to vanish. I was going to document every move, every theft, every lie, until the weight of their own narrative crushed them. The weekend my body gave out wasn't cinematic. No ambulance sirens, no collapse in front of a crowd. Just me on my kitchen floor, staring at a bottle of orange juice I couldn't open because my hands had locked up like rusted hinges. Every flare had its rhythm, heat blooming under my skin, swelling in the joints, then the kind of bone-deep fatigue that turned lifting a glass into an uphill climb. This time, it didn't stop after an hour. It didn't stop after a night. I documented it. Every pulse of pain, every failed attempt to turn a doorknob or type without typos. My doctor had told me, logs matter. They see what people can't. So I wrote everything down. Dates, times, severity scores, screenshots of swollen fingers next to the clock app. My personal medical journal read like crime scene notes, except the crime was happening inside me. On Monday, I scanned the updated physician's letter, complete with lab results, and attached it to a new AITA accommodation request. This time, I CC'd the HR manager directly, bypassing the portal. I even quoted the exact section of company policy that promised reasonable accommodation. The email was professional, restrained, impossible to dismiss as unreliable whining. Their response came 48 hours later. A template. We acknowledge receipt of your request. Please note business impact will be assessed before approval. Business impact, as if my condition needed to negotiate with revenue. That night, I made a decision. If they were going to treat this like a chess game, I'd stop playing checkers. I started exporting everything. My original risk model spec, complete with version history. The unit test harness I'd authored, untouched by Alex's edits. Screenshots of Slack threads where I had flagged compliance concerns, then been ignored. Calendar invites showing my removal from client calls. I encrypted the files and stored them on a private drive. Not because I planned to use them yet, but because I knew what was coming. They'd try to erase me. At the same time, I began building what I called my parallel record, a personal log. Each entry included the date, the actors, the action, and the evidence. Example: March 12th, 10:07 a.m., Slack thread, client rollout. I raised concern about threshold change. Alex responded, not a blocker. 2 hours later, VP praised Alex for agility. Screenshot saved. I didn't share the log, not with colleagues, not even with friends. It wasn't about sympathy anymore. It was about leverage. Meanwhile, the pain kept spreading. Some mornings I needed 2 hands just to turn the key in my door. At work, I wore long sleeves to hide the swelling. I avoided shaking hands. I excused myself from whiteboard sessions, claiming I needed to check numbers on my laptop, when in reality I couldn't grip the marker without dropping it. But my focus sharpened. Every flare, every dismissal, every slight made the picture clearer. This wasn't negligence. It was deliberate. They weren't just ignoring me. They were actively documenting against me. One afternoon, I opened my performance review draft, shared for transparency. Half the comments were direct lifts from Slack messages I'd written weeks earlier, stripped of context and reframed as delays. Alex's name appeared in the margin with leadership growth, tagged to my own work. I didn't argue. I downloaded the file, noted the metadata, and added another line to the log. That night, lying in bed with ice packs on both knees, I whispered something out loud for the first time. They want to fight. Fine. They'll get one. But on my terms. The ceiling fan hummed above me. My body felt like it was shutting down, but my mind was steadier than it had been in months, because I finally understood. The real power wasn't in asking them to see me. It was in making sure the truth couldn't be unseen. The switch happened quietly, almost politely. One morning I logged into the project dashboard, and my name was no longer listed as lead analyst. It was Alex's. No memo, no transition meeting, no acknowledgement. Just a silent swap that felt like erasure. From that point forward, I became a ghost in my own work. I watched from the sidelines as they gutted the model I'd built piece by piece. The guardrails I had fought to defend, fail-safes against false negatives, alert thresholds that protected clients from costly blind spots, were labeled unnecessary friction. Alex presented them as optimizations. What they really were was sabotage. The first sign of danger came during a demo with a mid-tier client. I sat in the back of the virtual meeting, muted, camera off. But I watched Alex run my code. I knew instantly what he'd changed. The console spat out warnings, yellow flags that once would have triggered automated rollbacks, but he'd downgraded them to info messages. He clicked past them without hesitation, smiling, gesturing like a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat. The client applauded. I sat there sick to my stomach because I knew what they couldn't see. Those info messages were cracks in the dam. Later, I raised the issue in the project channel. I worded it carefully, referencing compliance documentation and citing SLA clauses. The adjusted thresholds introduce non-conformance risk, I wrote. Within minutes, the VP responded, "Noted. Let's stay solutions-focused, no fear-mongering." Fear-mongering, that was the label they pinned on me for telling the truth. Within a week, I was cut from all future demos. My calendar invites vanished. I wasn't even CC'd on the emails. I only knew about updates when colleagues whispered them in DMs, apologetic but scared. One of them wrote, "Don't push it. He's watching everything." HR's involvement escalated. A formal attendance guidance appeared in my inbox, citing days I had been out, days documented with physicians' notes. They weren't counting my work delivered at 3 a.m. or the bug fixes I had submitted during flare hours. They were counting bodies in chairs, not value produced. It was a trap, and I could see the walls closing in, but traps go both ways. Every guidance note they sent me, I archived. Every time they scrubbed my name from a deck, I screenshotted. Every time Alex stood in front of a client and called my math his own, I saved the recording. I didn't fight in the open anymore. I collected. I built a library. One evening, long after the office had emptied, I walked the quiet floor past rows of screens left glowing in standby mode. I stopped at the glass wall of the executive wing. Through the dim reflection, I saw my own outline, tired, swollen, but steady. I whispered to myself, "They think they're winning." What they didn't know was that every downgrade, every dismissal, every calculated erasure was another brick in the case I was building. And sooner or later, those bricks would come down, hard. By then, my log had grown into a dossier, dozens of entries, screenshots, and cross-references. It didn't look like a diary anymore. It looked like evidence. And when the VP doubled down, I knew it was time to move from collecting to acting. It started with another rejection. My second appeal for medical leave, this time armed with fresh labs and a new letter from my specialist, came back with the same template reply. Business impact under review. Not approved at this time. No signature. No acknowledgement. Just a wall of text as cold as the fluorescent light in the HR portal. That was my line in the sand. I drafted a new request, but this time I copied outside counsel. My attorney specialized in ADA accommodation disputes, and even the CC line was enough to shift the tone. I attached every physician certification, every diagnostic, every time-stamped Slack conversation showing my warnings ignored. I quoted policy pages by number, highlighting where their own handbook promised protections. Then I hit send, but I didn't stop there. The client had trusted me with their rollout because I'd built the guardrails from day one. And while I couldn't sabotage Alex's changes, I could document the risks. Using the contract's own language, I prepared a professional, surgical memo addressed to their security liaison. It wasn't emotional, and it wasn't an accusation. It was a factual list. These thresholds had been changed. These safeguards disabled. Here were the timestamps and commit IDs. I ended it with a single line. This may affect SLA compliance. Within an hour, I received a short reply. Thank you. Logged for review. At the office, the fallout was immediate. The VP stormed past my desk without looking at me, then called an urgent sync with Alex. Doors closed, blinds drawn. Rumors trickled out. The client had asked pointed questions during a governance check-in, questions only I would have known to raise. By the next morning, I had a new email in my inbox. Subject line, performance plan, final draft. The bullet points were sharper now, laced with phrases like unreliable and poor client communication. It was clear what they wanted, to force me into signing a confession dressed up as a development plan. I didn't reply. I forwarded it to counsel. That evening I sat in my apartment surrounded by stacks of printouts. The room was silent except for the hum of the fridge. I thought about the years I'd given them. Missed holidays, missed sleep. Nights where I pushed code until dawn just to hit impossible deadlines. I thought about every time I'd believed loyalty would protect me. And I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. They wanted me cornered, compliant, erased. But the truth was no longer theirs to bury. I closed my laptop, leaned back in the chair, and whispered the words I'd been holding inside for weeks. You made this a fight. Now it's mine. Go Live Night had the hum of a countdown, the kind you feel in your ribs before a launch. Except this wasn't spaceflight. It was corporate recklessness, wrapped in PowerPoint confidence. I wasn't invited to the war room call, but I knew the schedule by heart. Midnight deployment, live data feed by 12:30, client validation at 1 plus. I sat at home with my laptop open anyway. The alerts were public to the entire company, and I still had access to the console. I watched the logs tick by in real time, each line like a pulse. At first, everything looked clean. The system spun up, traffic balanced across nodes, throughput stable. Alex was probably basking in praise on the other side of the screen. Then the cracks appeared. At 12:47 a.m., the first anomaly slipped through. A batch of flag transactions that should have triggered a block instead sailed past as safe. My guardrails, downgraded to warnings, flashed yellow in the log. Alex's edits treated them like background noise. By 1:02 a.m., the console was bleeding. Thousands of entries scrolled by, thresholds collapsing under the weight of real-world data. False negatives piled up like dominoes. On the other side of the firewall, actual money was moving unchecked. I could picture the client's system analysts staring at their dashboards, realizing too late that something was deeply wrong. I took screenshots, each one stamped with the date, the time, the commit ID that matched Alex's changes. I saved them to my encrypted drive, then to a backup USB. Redundancy was survival. The pager chaos began minutes later. Notifications flooded Slack. A hear tags, panicked threads, engineers scrambling to patch a leak they didn't understand. I wasn't tagged. Of course not. But I watched, silent, as the scramble turned into shouting. Rollback fails. Thresholds not restoring. Why is the guardrail commented out? Who signed off on this? I could almost hear the panic vibrating through their keyboards. At 1:23 a.m., the client escalated. Their security liaison, my liaison, posted a blunt message. This implementation deviates from the approved spec. Expansion is frozen pending external review. External review. Those words landed like a gavel. I leaned back in my chair, pain radiating through my joints, and exhaled. Because I already knew who they'd call for that review. Not Alex, not the VP. Me, the person who had built the system before they gutted it. The person who had the logs, the specs, the receipts. I closed my laptop, slid the USB into a drawer, and sat in the dark for a long time. My body felt wrecked, but my mind was steady. They had ignored every warning, and now the proof wasn't just in my files. It was live, undeniable, and costing them millions. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel erased. I felt inevitable. The morning after the meltdown, my inbox looked like a crime scene. Half a dozen emails marked urgent, meeting invites stacked back to back, and one message from HR with the subject line, request to discuss transition options. Translation, they wanted me out, but neatly. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded everything to counsel, zipped up my evidence log, and prepared my own exit, but not the way they expected. At noon, I walked into the office for the first time in weeks. The floor was buzzing, faces pale from lack of sleep, eyes darting away from mine. Alex sat hunched at his desk, tie loose, staring at a screen full of errors. The VP's door was shut, blinds drawn. I didn't go to my desk. I went straight to HR. My attorney was already waiting on the call. Calm, precise, professional. We laid it out. ADA violations, retaliatory behavior, documented evidence of misattribution and hostile treatment. Every screenshot, every Slack export, every timestamp lined up like dominoes. HR's rep kept nodding, lips pressed thin. They knew. They'd seen enough to understand this wasn't going away quietly. When I finally resigned, it wasn't an act of surrender. It was a move of control. My letter was one sentence long. Effective immediately, I resigned my position, pending settlement discussions through counsel. And then came the twist they hadn't planned for. 2 days later, I was on a video call with a competitor, the same firm that had been circling our client for months. They didn't just want to hire me. They wanted me to lead a stabilization squad, a clean room remediation effort to rebuild the broken guardrails. I didn't even have to sell myself. The client had already vouched for me, forwarding my compliance memo as proof of who had done the real work. By the end of the week, I was sitting in a new office, temporary, bare walls, folding chair, but alive with purpose. My new team listened when I spoke. They asked for my diagrams, my specs, my experience. And within days, the system I rebuilt was holding steady. Thresholds restored, alerts firing exactly where they should. Meanwhile, inside my old company, the implosion deepened. Word leaked from internal audit. Emails where the VP pressured HR to set a precedent against medical leave excuses had surfaced. Screenshots circulated quietly, forwarded in whispers. The story was out, and it wasn't mine alone anymore. On the client side, the freeze became formal. Expansion canceled. RFP reissued. My competitor, my new team, was invited to bid. One evening, as I closed my laptop, my body still aching but my spirit clear, I realized the shift had already happened. I wasn't the fragile one anymore. They were. It didn't end with a bang. It ended with a memo. 2 months after I walked out, a company-wide email landed in the inboxes of every employee I used to sit beside. Subject line: Leadership Reorganization. Buried 3 paragraphs down was the announcement that my VP was pursuing opportunities elsewhere. No thanks for his service. No farewell party. Just a quiet erasure. The same way he had tried to erase me. But the damage was already public. The marquee client, the one I'd designed the entire risk model for, announced their new contract. They chose my new team. The press release highlighted commitment to compliance and resilience, thinly veiled language that everyone in the industry understood. My old company had lost not just revenue but reputation, and no spin could hide it. Inside, HR scrambled to repair their image. A new policy hit the portal. Annual ADA and medical leave training, mandatory for all managers. Words like accommodation, respect, and non-retaliation appeared in bold. I knew it wasn't kindness. It was liability. But still, it was change. The settlement came quietly. No courtrooms, no headlines, just signatures on a stack of papers. Back pay, non-disparagement clauses, health coverage extensions. They wanted it sealed, and I let them have that, because I already had the only form of justice that mattered. Proof, memory, a future they couldn't control. And while they tried to rewrite their narrative, I was busy writing mine. The competitor that hired me didn't just keep me, they promoted me. I became the lead on resilience frameworks, the person clients asked for by name. At industry events, I wasn't in the audience anymore. I was on stage, standing under bright lights, delivering a keynote titled Operational Resilience Starts with Human Resilience. I spoke about systems, but I also spoke about people, the ones crushed under business needs, the ones told they were weak for being human. The room was silent, not out of politeness, but because the truth resonated deeper than I expected. I closed with a line I'd carried through every flare, every dismissal, every night staring at error logs alone. I wasn't weak, I was unprotected. And now I build protection into every system I touch. The applause that followed wasn't just noise, it was vindication. And for the first time in years, I walked off stage without pain in my steps, only strength.